My name is Elena Morris, and I am 32 years old. If you had asked me a year ago to describe my father, I would have told you he was a self-made man, disciplined, respected, successful. I would have said he was flawed like all men are, but that deep down he had a heart. I used to believe he loved me. That illusion shattered on the day my husband died. His name was Liam. He was everything to me. Not just my partner, but the man who helped pull my family from the brink when no one else would. Liam was kind, brilliant, and endlessly patient. When my father's real estate business collapsed 5 years ago, it was Liam, my husband, who loaned him $300,000. No contract, no interest, just a handshake and the words, "Family comes first." And when my father remarried a woman named Dana, the kind of woman who wore pearls at breakfast and spoke in compliments dipped in poison, Liam was the only one who stood by me as I was slowly pushed to the edge of my own family. He called it what it was, emotional excommunication masked as polite distance. And yet, through it all, I still tried. I still hoped. That hope died the day Liam did. It was a Friday, rainy, ironic in the way the sky sometimes knows before we do. A drunk driver ran a red light. Liam didn't make it. My world fell apart. I called my father from the hospital, hands still trembling. "Dad," I said, voice cracking. "Liam's gone. The funeral's on Sunday." There was a pause, 5 seconds of silence. Then he spoke. "Sweetheart, I'm sorry, but Sunday's Dana's 50th. We've booked the entire wine estate. It's been planned for months." I didn't understand. I thought he was confused. "Dad, it's Liam's funeral." He didn't miss a beat. "You'll have other funerals, honey, but Dana only turns 50 once." My knees buckled. I sat on the cold hospital floor, phone still pressed to my ear. And that was when I knew I no longer had a father. Just a man who happened to make me. Sunday came. 15 people showed up at the funeral. Not a single one from my side of the family. I stood at the podium, looking out at the rows of empty chairs. And I read Liam's eulogy to ghosts. No Drew, my brother. No father. No call. No flowers. Dana posted photos from her birthday on Instagram that evening, laughing in a gold sequin dress, champagne in hand, celebrating love and life with my forever people, the caption read. The contrast was unbearable. I stared at my reflection in the mirror that night, still wearing black, and something inside me broke. But I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I didn't call him to demand anything. I simply went still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Then the next morning at precisely 9 a.m., there was a knock at my door. I opened it to see my father standing there with his leather briefcase, looking refreshed, smiling faintly as though we just had coffee last week. "Sweetheart," he said, "I need a favor. Dana's launching a skincare line, and we're hoping you can help with branding. You're the expert in advertising, right?" That was the moment I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't rage, it wasn't pain, it was clarity. Ice-cold, deliberate clarity. I smiled gently, almost sweetly. "Of course, Dad," I said. "Let's talk tomorrow." He left relieved, thinking the slate had been wiped clean, but I had just picked up the first piece of it. I was born in Charleston, but grew up mostly in Denver after my mother passed away when I was 6. My father, Gregory Morris, was a sharp, commanding man who built his reputation in real estate development. I remember him best in tailored suits and with a voice that could quiet a room. After my mother died, he became colder, harder, still present in my life, but more as a provider than a parent. He remarried when I was 17 to a woman named Dana who always smelled like expensive perfume and never looked at me like I belonged. From the beginning, she treated me with politeness that felt rehearsed, like she was performing for some invisible audience. My older brother Drew adjusted quickly. He always knew how to charm people, how to make himself useful in the eyes of authority. He followed my father into the business world, was gifted a management position in one of the family's companies before his 28th birthday. I, on the other hand, was the one who made different choices. I chose creativity. After college, I moved to Chicago and began working in branding and design. Within 5 years, I had worked my way up to associate creative director at one of the fastest growing agencies in the Midwest. Liam and I met during a pitch meeting for a sustainability project. He was an engineer working on green infrastructure. We debated font choices and ended up marrying 2 years later. Liam wasn't just my partner, he was the one person who made me feel safe to be exactly who I was. He had patience for my silence, appreciation for my boundaries, and a fierce loyalty that my own blood never gave me. When my father's empire began crumbling after a major zoning scandal, it was Liam who stepped in. He offered the loan without hesitation, believing that family meant stepping up when others fall. My father took the money and rebuilt. Dana thanked Liam once over dinner and then promptly erased the debt from memory. After that, they treated Liam as an accessory. At family gatherings, we were often excluded from conversations about real estate strategy or legacy planning. Drew got the business updates. I got comments about how maybe someday I'd settle down into something more stable than advertising. My success was invisible to them, but Liam saw it all. He encouraged me to start my own agency. He helped me with contracts, clients, taxes. When I began making more than Drew, my father didn't ask how. He just suggested I donate to the family trust to help cover some shared expenses. I did for a while. But when Liam died and no one showed up to stand beside me, that was the moment I knew I'd been orphaned twice. I thought about everything I'd given every dinner party, where I bit my tongue every holiday, where I smiled through Dana's thinly veiled insults. I thought about how Drew once told me I was too sensitive when I cried after being excluded from a family retreat. I thought about my father's toast at Dana's last birthday, where he said Dana is the love that put my life back on track. She gave me a real family again. He didn't even look at me when he said it. And yet, after all of that, he still had the arrogance to show up the morning after Liam's funeral to ask for my help. Not for condolences, not for support, but for a favor for his wife's business. That was the moment I realized what I meant to him. I wasn't a daughter. I was a resource, a name in his phone with skills he could tap into. And maybe once I would have cried, but not that day. That day I started thinking like a strategist. The funeral was quiet. No black cars in procession, no long lines of mourners. Just a few friends from Liam's firm, our neighbors, and one of my former college roommates who took the first flight in. 15 people in total. I stood there wearing the same black coat I wore at my mother's memorial. And I delivered Liam's eulogy with a voice I barely recognized as my own. My hands trembled when I held the paper, but I didn't cry. The tears had dried up the night before when I saw Dana's birthday post. She wore a gold gown and held a glass of champagne in one hand, while laughing beside a towering cake. My father stood behind her beaming arm wrapped around her waist like a trophy husband. 50 and fabulous, the caption read. In the background of the photo, I recognized the wine estate they had booked, the same venue I had once considered for my wedding reception. That detail cut deeper than I expected. At the funeral, someone asked me where my father was. I said he had other obligations, and the person nodded awkwardly, shifting their gaze. Everyone could feel the absence. After the service, I sat alone in the front pew long after the others had left. I stared at Liam's closed casket and whispered, "I don't think I know how to be strong without you." But even in that silence, I felt something. Not comfort, not quite, but direction. Liam had always been calm in crisis. His favorite phrase was, "What's the next right move?" Not the big answer, just the next move. That evening, I returned home to a house that still smelled like his cologne. His clothes hung neatly in the closet. His book lay open on the nightstand. I sat down at his desk and pulled open the drawer he used for important documents. There, under our marriage license and our joint savings statements, was a folder marked Dad's Loan. Inside were Liam's handwritten notes, payment dates, bank transfers, emails confirming the amounts. And at the very bottom, a scanned PDF of a cashier's check for 300 units dated 5 years ago. No contract, no repayment plan, just generosity. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. My father had taken that help and erased it. Dana acted like it never happened. Drew told me over drinks a year ago that Liam got too comfortable playing savior. I sat at that desk for hours, reviewing documents, building timelines. Then I opened my laptop and started a list. Every wire transfer, every message, every receipt. I included voice notes Liam had left me when he was frustrated with my father's demands. At the bottom of the list, I wrote a single line in bold: "This is the debt that buried my husband." The next day, I met with a lawyer, Liam's former legal advisor, and explained everything. He didn't need much convincing. "What do you want to do with this?" he asked. I took a breath and said I want to recover what Liam gave. And I want to do it legally, cleanly, and without a single raised voice. He nodded. Then we start by tracing the money. Meanwhile, I went back to work. I smiled in meetings, delivered client pitches, reviewed design layouts. But every night I returned to Liam's files. It became my routine, my grieving process. I turned my pain into spreadsheets and strategy. I pulled bank records, collected emails, and slowly, methodically began assembling the truth. It wasn't just the loan. It was everything that came after. The subtle ways my father leveraged my career. The projects he pushed my way, not because he respected me, but because he needed free labor. I found invoices I'd sent for branding consultations that had gone unpaid. I found correspondence between Dana and my father discussing how Elena owes us that much considering what we've done for her. I highlighted every word. I let them sharpen me. I wasn't going to confront them yet. That would come later. First, I needed leverage. So I made another call to one of my contacts in private equity, and I asked a simple question: is Gregory Morris still looking for bridge funding? The answer was yes, and that was when I knew. They still needed something. That meant I still had time to make my next move. Over the next 6 weeks, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was Elena Morris, the poised creative director leading brand strategy for national campaigns. I spoke confidently in meetings, smiled at clients, signed contracts with a steady hand. But by night, I became something else, an archivist of betrayal. I mapped out every favor my father had ever asked of me, every quick branding idea he'd requested without payment, every time Dana borrowed my copywriting team for her product launches. The numbers added up faster than I expected. Tens of thousands in unpaid consulting work favors that had quietly subsidized their vanity ventures. I began tracking equity records. My father's business had recovered post-collapse thanks to Liam's loan, but it hadn't flourished. He had sold off 30% to a private equity group based in Atlanta just to stay afloat. That same group was now growing restless. They wanted a cash out, fast. I reached out to them under a different name through a shell agency I registered in Delaware. I offered to buy their shares at a competitive price, no questions asked. I wired the funds the next day. Suddenly, I owned 30% of Morrison Hill Properties. My father didn't know yet. He thought the PE group had finally gotten bored and liquidated. He called it a blessing. I called it positioning. Around the same time, Dana soft launched her skincare brand Volana, using the same tired formulas and fake wellness slogans everyone else was peddling. But she had big ambitions. She wanted a national launch, and she needed someone who could make it happen. Me. She reached out through a mutual contact, pretending it was a casual inquiry. "I hear you're the best," she said over the phone, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'd love your input on Volana's visual identity. Maybe a full campaign. Of course we'll compensate you properly." I said yes. Then I set the terms. I charged her my highest consulting rate, triple what I'd ever quoted anyone else. I sent her a contract with clear clauses, ownership rights, licensing deliverables. I made it airtight, and she signed it without reading. "We're family," she said with a laugh. "I trust you." That trust would cost her everything. Over the following month, I built her brand from the ground up. The logos were stunning. The product visuals sleek and aspirational. Her social media buzzed. Investors started calling. I had never worked harder on something I intended to destroy. In parallel, I requested full audits of the Morrison Hill finances. As a 30% shareholder, I was entitled to those records. What I found shocked me. My father had been shifting company funds into Dana's brand under the guise of experimental investments. Over $100,000 had been funneled into Volana without board approval. That was enough. I compiled the documents, the wire transfers, the timelines. My lawyer helped draft the legal notices. At this point, I didn't feel rage. I felt precision. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. Liam had believed in doing things cleanly, ethically. I would honor that. One afternoon, I received a call from Drew. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "Just wanted to check in. Dad says you've been working with Dana. Sounds like things are going great." I could hear the suspicion behind his words. "Yes," I said. "Everything's going smoothly. Just a few more weeks until launch." "Cool, cool," he replied. "Glad we're all reconnecting." Reconnecting. That word made my skin crawl. They thought I had forgiven them, that I'd fallen back into place like a good daughter, eager to please, eager to help. But they didn't know I'd kept every receipt. They didn't know I'd hired a forensic accountant to trace the money Liam had given them. They didn't know I was now the second largest shareholder in the company my father had spent 40 years building. They had no idea that the ground beneath them was already starting to shift. And I had no intention of warning them. Not yet. That would come soon enough, when it would hurt the most. The launch party for Villana was held at the Glenview Hotel Ballroom, a venue Dana had described as elegant without being overdone. She wore a silver gown with matching heels and moved through the crowd with the confidence of a woman who believed she had finally stepped into her own empire. My father stood beside her, smiling for photographers, sipping champagne, introducing her to minor celebrities and wellness influencers. Drew made a short speech about legacy and innovation, conveniently omitting the fact that Villana's funding had come from company accounts. I stood off to the side, watching it unfold, calm and composed in a tailored black suit. Everything was going according to plan. That night, I handed Dana the final deliverables, the social media schedule, brand manual's content strategy. She thanked me profusely, hugged me like I was family, and joked, "This is the start of a new era for all of us." I nodded and smiled. Yes, a new era. The next morning, my attorney filed the lawsuit: breach of contract, misuse of corporate funds, intellectual property theft. The documents were delivered by courier to the offices of Morrison Hill, and copies were emailed directly to Dana, Gregory, and Drew. By lunchtime, my phone rang with 12 missed calls from my father. I didn't answer. Instead, I met with the other shareholders and called an emergency board meeting for the following week. That night, Dana posted a cryptic story on Instagram about betrayal and wolves in sheep's clothing. The comment section was flooded with confusion and gossip. I said nothing. At the board meeting, I walked into the conference room like I belonged there, because I did. I was no longer the afterthought daughter. I was a stakeholder, a creditor, and soon a plaintiff. Gregory looked pale. Drew refused to meet my eyes. Dana wasn't invited. "Let's get to the point," I said, placing a thick binder on the table. "Liam gave you a $300,000 loan. You never repaid it. You never acknowledged it. You used my husband's generosity to save this company and then erased him from history. That ends today." I flipped open the binder page. By page, emails, bank transfers, dates, notes, in Liam's handwriting. This, I continued, is not about revenge. It's about acknowledgement, restitution, and yes, accountability. My father leaned forward, face tense. "Sweetheart, this isn't the way." "Don't call me that," I said quietly. "You forfeited that right when you skipped Liam's funeral for Dana's birthday." The room went silent. No one defended him. No one needed to. The evidence spoke for itself. I passed out formal repayment demands along with a motion for a vote to remove Drew from his executive role due to negligence. The shareholders voted. Drew was out. A week later, Dana's brand collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny. Investors pulled out after discovering she had used funds improperly. I revoked the licensing rights to all branding materials legally. She had no claim to any of it, without full payment, which she couldn't afford. Her social media accounts were frozen, the website taken offline, and within 2 weeks, Villana was declared insolvent. She went on a podcast to cry about betrayal. I let her. My father tried to negotiate privately. He called me, emailed, even showed up at my office. "We can settle this quietly," he offered. "We're still family." I looked him in the eye and replied, "Family doesn't treat people like they're disposable." Then I handed him the final document, a foreclosure notice on the Glenview estate. They had used it as collateral on a silent loan which they had now defaulted on. It would be sold within 60 days. That was the moment he finally understood. I wasn't just demanding justice. I was reclaiming every inch of ground they'd taken from me. Not with anger, not with screaming, just with truth and law. The twist wasn't that I'd turned on them. The twist was that I had been watching, documenting, preparing, all while they underestimated me, and now they couldn't even see the floor collapsing beneath them until they were already falling. 60 days later, the Glenview estate was listed for sale. A discreet but firm foreclosure process moved forward, and the once proud home Dana used to host her garden brunches and vision board parties was now posted on real estate sites under motivated seller. I didn't attend the open house, but I did send my assistant to quietly observe. She reported that Dana looked like a ghost thin pale, dressed in last year's fashion, and trying to feign interest in potential buyers. Gregory wasn't seen that day. He had retreated into silence, rarely leaving the smaller rental condo they'd moved into. My final step came with the board's vote to restructure Morrison Hill. With Drew removed, I presented a new executive team and announced a rebrand of the company. Liam Morris Holdings. I declared unveiling the new logo in honor of the man who saved this business and was never once thanked. The room applauded. One board member stood up and said, "It's about time someone brought real leadership to this table." A month later, I transferred majority ownership of the business into a nonprofit trust under Liam's name. The goal to fund urban housing projects for widowed parents and single-income families. I kept a small salary for myself, but gave up equity. I didn't want the empire. I wanted the meaning. The trust would carry Liam's name far beyond the years he was denied. Media caught wind of the story of the widow who rebuilt her husband's legacy by exposing her own father. Articles were written, podcasts invited me to speak. I declined most. I wasn't interested in fame. I was interested in peace. And it came slowly, not in fireworks, but in quiet mornings, in making coffee without flinching, in hearing Liam's favorite songs and smiling instead of crying. My father reached out one more time. He sent a letter, handwritten, messy. "I know I failed you." It began. "I lost sight of what mattered. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll let me apologize face to face." I folded the letter neatly, placed it in a drawer, and never wrote back. Some things don't deserve closure. They deserve distance. Dana, from what I heard, moved in with a cousin out of state. She started a blog about healing through loss and blamed everything on betrayal. Drew took a job in a startup out west. He sent me a LinkedIn request. I deleted it. I didn't block him. Just removed him quietly, exactly how they had removed me once. And then came the morning I stood in front of the newly constructed community center, built with the profits from my father's former company. The plaque read, "The Liam Morris Resource Center, in memory of generosity unreturned and love never forgotten." I touched the brass letters and whispered, "This is yours, love. We did this." The final step had been taken. The story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. And in that space, I found myself again, stronger, calmer, and completely untouchable. It was nearly a year to the day since Liam's funeral, when my father showed up at my office unannounced. My receptionist buzzed through, her voice low and uncertain. "Elena, there's a Mr. Gregory Morris here to see you. Should I tell him you're out?" I paused. For a moment I considered avoiding the confrontation, but then I looked around at the glass walls of the foundation office, at the photographs of families we'd helped, at the scholarship letters posted on our community board. This space, this purpose was mine. I had nothing to fear. "Send him in," I said. He entered slowly. Shoulders slumped, face aged beyond his years. He looked like a man carrying the weight of every poor decision he'd ever made. His suit didn't fit quite right. His shoes looked worn, and his eyes, once sharp and dismissive, were soft with something that looked almost like remorse. "Elena," he began, "I know I don't have the right to be here, but I needed to see you. One last time." I didn't offer him a seat. I simply looked at him, waiting. He took a breath. "I ruined everything. I let Dana get in my head. I prioritized status over people, and I thought that loyalty from blood was automatic. I was wrong. About you. About Liam. About everything." He rubbed his face, trembling. "When you didn't answer my letters, I thought I'd lost you forever. But then I heard about this place, about what you've done with the business, with the money, and I realized you didn't just survive. You elevated everything. He paused, voice breaking. I wasn't there for you when it mattered most. For a second, I saw him as the man he might have been, the father who read bedtime stories, the man who taught me how to swim. But that image vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the man who abandoned me at my husband's funeral and came asking for favors the next day. I finally spoke. You preferred Dana's birthday over Liam's funeral, and then you asked me to build her brand. Do you understand what that moment did to me? He nodded, eyes brimming. I do, and I won't ask for your forgiveness. But if there's any chance, any path back, I want to try. I want to be your father again. I studied him, then replied, I don't need a father. I needed one a year ago, 5 years ago. You made your choices, and now I've made mine. He looked down. So this is it. Not entirely, I said. You can still make something of what's left of your life. Volunteer. Apologize to people you hurt. Do something real. But with me, I paused. I don't know, maybe someday, but it'll be on my terms, and not because you asked. He looked at me one last time, then nodded. I understand. He turned and walked out without another word. I stood by the window and watched as he disappeared down the street. The moment didn't feel triumphant. It felt honest. There was no dramatic music, no final hug, just truth. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something owed or demanded. It was something earned slowly through action. And maybe if he ever did the work, there would be a future where we could share a cup of coffee as two people who once shared a name. But for now, I let him go. And I didn't look back. The weeks that followed were surprisingly quiet. No lawsuits, no letters, no more unexpected visits. I focused on the foundation, on building programs for widowed women, creating internship pipelines for students who reminded me of myself at 22, overlooked but fiercely capable. Every Friday afternoon, I met with our first scholarship recipient, Maya, a soft-spoken girl who lost both parents to illness and still managed to finish high school with honors. Watching her grow reminded me why I had done all of this. Not for vengeance, not even for closure, but to break the cycle, to choose purpose over bitterness. People began asking me if I ever regretted cutting off my father. I never answered directly, because the truth isn't simple. Some mornings I missed the idea of having a parent. I missed birthdays with people who knew my childhood stories. I missed what never really existed in the first place. But I never missed the version of myself I used to be, quiet, compliant, constantly adjusting to avoid conflict. That woman died with Liam. The woman who stood in her place had rebuilt herself brick by brick, not hardened but sharpened like steel, tempered by fire. I began journaling again. Nothing poetic, just reflections. One entry read, "Love without boundaries becomes a leash. Loyalty without accountability becomes a trap." I reread that line often. On Liam's birthday, I visited his grave with fresh sunflowers, his favorite. I sat beside him and read letters from students whose lives we'd changed. I told him about Maya, about the community garden named after him, about the day I deleted the final voicemail from my father without listening. "I think you'd be proud," I whispered. A breeze rustled the trees above me like an answer. That evening, I hosted a dinner at the foundation, just 10 people, quiet conversation, no speeches. Grace, a counselor who volunteered on weekends, leaned over to me and said, "You know, I used to think healing meant forgetting. But watching you, I realize it means remembering without hurting." That stayed with me, not because it sounded wise, but because it felt true. I hadn't erased my pain. I'd rearranged it, rebuilt with it, and somewhere along the way, it had transformed from weight into wisdom. I no longer needed to be understood by the people who once dismissed me. I no longer waited for apologies that would never come. I had made peace not with them, but with myself. And that was enough. 1 year after Liam's funeral, I stood before a crowd of students, donors, and volunteers at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Liam Morris Learning Center. The sun was soft against the new brick facade, and the air buzzed with quiet joy. I wore a navy dress Liam once said brought out my eyes. I held the scissors with steady hands. As the ribbon fell, applause rose around me, but my eyes drifted toward the sky blue and open, just like the future Liam always believed in. After the ceremony, I walked alone through the building. The walls were painted in warm earth tones, the rooms filled with books, computers, and the laughter of children learning something new. In the art room, a mural had been painted by local artists. Liam's favorite quote at the center. "What's the next right move?" I traced the edge of the words with my fingers, letting the memory settle over me like a soft blanket. On my way out, I noticed a man standing near the gate. Gray hair, hesitant eyes. My father. He didn't try to come closer. He didn't wave. He just stood there watching. Maybe he had come to see the building, maybe to see me. But when our eyes met, I didn't flinch. I simply nodded once, calm, controlled, and walked past him without breaking stride. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. He had chosen his path. I had chosen mine. That night I returned home and sat in the garden Liam had planted now, blooming wildly with the kind of chaos he loved. Daisies and lavender climbing ivy and sunflowers reaching like arms to the sky. I poured a glass of wine, opened the last journal Liam ever touched, and whispered, "We did it." I no longer felt hollow. I no longer felt angry. What I felt was this deep, unshakable sense of justice. Not the kind you shout about, but the kind you live quietly every day by simply refusing to be diminished. And as the sun disappeared behind the trees, I looked up at the stars and said the words I had waited a full year to speak with absolute peace. "It's finished, my love. You can rest now, and so can I."